Chapter 11. Quanka. It was the end of the fourth day. For a long time now, the train of mules, led by Don Ernesto, had been following a steep, cobblestone road. At first there was a house only here and there, then gradually they became closer together until the road was lined with them. Lean, hungry dogs, their ribs showing under their skins, ran out from the whitewashed huts and barked at the mules. Chico knew they must be getting near Quanka. Once a man, wrapped in a woolen poncho, came to the doorway of his brown mud hut to see what caused the commotion. He waved and called, "Hola, Don Ernesto, how are you? How went the journey?" He looked curiously at Chico as he spoke and asked the muleteer who he was. "He is the huérfano, the orphan of Don Fernando at Chan-Chan," Don Ernesto answered. The man leaned back into the dark house and called to someone. A woman came to the door. She examined Chico from head to foot and shook her head, setting her pigtails swinging. "Poor little one," she murmured. Chico hung his head. A dull flush crept up under his skin. Then, as they passed by, he forgot his shame. He knew the journey was almost over, and he was eager to arrive in the city. The sharply pointed peaks of the higher Andes were gone now. There were hills, of course, for Quanka was built at 8,000 feet between the two mighty ranges of the Andes. But these hills rolled away gently from the valley floor. Their crowns were covered with tall, slim eucalyptus trees, swaying gracefully in the breeze. Their sides were patchworked with the green and brown squares of the little farms that covered them. Chico sniffed the air. It was softer here and did not sting his nose as it did high in the mountains. It carried the sweet odors of grass drying in the sun and the smell of new-plowed earth. Don Ernesto climbed to the top of a little hill on the road. He turned back, smiling, and waved to the boy. "Aquí estamos, here we are," he called. Chico poked excitedly at the last mule to hurry it on. Slowly, slowly, they mounted the hill until Chico stood beside the arriero. In front of him lay the city of Quanka, its red tile roofs flashing in the afternoon sun. Above these rose the square towers and round white domes of the churches. To Chico's eyes, there seemed to be 1,000 houses. He had never imagined Quanka would be so large. Moving more quickly now, the little caravan wound down the road to the banks of the Rio Tomebamba that glittered past the town and rushed noisily down the valley. They mounted the high, curved stone bridge that crossed it and clattered across to a narrow, winding street. They were in Quanka. Chico was so busy with the mules that he had very little time to look around, but he did see that the street was filled with people, all pushing and shoving to get by. Chico's mouth hung open in astonishment. Indian women dressed in layer upon layer of orange, red, and blue wool skirts passed him. Around their shoulders were wrapped wool scarves, and on the head of each a cheap Panama hat was perched. The men wore white trousers, like Chico's, and long red ponchos. Each person carried something. Some were bent over under loads of firewood or red clay pots that almost hid them from sight. Others carried fresh vegetables or crates of chickens. Even the tiny children, pattering along behind their parents and dressed in tiny copies of their clothes, carried little baskets with small packages in them. As the Indians passed Don Ernesto and the boy, they took off their straw hats and said, "Adios, sus mercedes," in soft, slurred voices. And Don Ernesto answered, "Adios." Suddenly, they entered a street where few people walked. Don Ernesto shouted happily, "Soon we shall be home, Chico. There is the cathedral." Chico nodded. He was too bewildered to say anything. He had never thought that a city could be so noisy or so full of people. His ears ached already. From overhead came a sharp clang. It was repeated once. Then from rooftops all over the city, the clatter of 100 church bells arose. The few people in the street stopped as if a hand had reached out and held each one quiet while they worshipped God. The clamor of bells was over in a moment, and once more the Indians began to move. Don Ernesto led the way down the street past the cathedral. The great wooden doors stood open. Chico peered inside and then moved on, a prayer on his lips that he would find what he had come to seek. At one house with whitewashed walls and a pale blue door, no different than the rest to Chico's eyes, Don Ernesto stopped. He pounded on the door and rattled the lock. He shouted loudly and happily, "Hermana, open up, open the door, it is Ernesto!" From inside came the buzz of voices and a shrill cry. Then there was a patter of footsteps, and the double doors flew open. "Ernesto, Ernesto! Thanks be to God! Thanks be to God! You are home again!" A little woman in a black dress, 2 long pigtails swinging behind her, stood at the door, her great dark eyes full of tears. Don Ernesto threw one arm around her and gave her a big hug. "Well, sister, and did you think Ernestico had been lost in the mountains?" he asked with a full laugh. A head popped out from behind Tia Maria's skirts, then another and another, until Chico lost count. Gleaming brown eyes looked shyly at the uncle, gone for so many weeks that they had almost forgotten him. The same eyes, pair by pair, shifted to Chico and stared. Suddenly, Chico felt strange and unhappy. He wished that he had stayed at home with grandfather. Then he would not have had to meet all these boys and girls who stared at him as though he were some wild animal from the mountains. He looked down at the ground and twisted his bare foot in the cobblestones. Before Chico could think about himself anymore, Don Ernesto shooed the children out of the way and drove the mules through the doorway into the inner courtyard. There, with the help of Chico and a barefoot servant boy, Don Ernesto took off the saddles and sacks of potatoes. Then, clattering over the stones, the animals were taken off to the pasture. The house of Don Ernesto and his sister was built around a square patio. A covered passage ran along the edge, and from this opened the rooms. To Chico, who knew only a one-room house, this house seemed large enough for many more people. There were doors in whatever direction he looked. Bright flowers and grass grew in the patio. It was like a little garden inside a house. It did not take the children long to get over their shyness. They threw themselves on their uncle while Tia Maria stood by, her hands twisted into her big apron, and smiled. Chico looked at the children carefully. There seemed to be 3 girls and 2 boys, although he could not be sure of this, for they darted back and forth so fast that he could hardly keep track of them. One boy, about Chico's size, wore straight black pants that came just below his knees. His legs were covered with long black cotton stockings, and he wore a pair of high black shoes. The other little boy wore white trousers, somewhat like Chico's. The little girls had on cotton dresses of blue and white and wore little white and black shawls. Chico looked down at his own ragged clothes and felt even more shy. Amidst the chattering of the children came Don Ernesto's voice saying, "Here, niños, you have forgotten your manners. I have brought you a visitor." He turned to his sister Maria and said, "Hermana, this is Chico. He is the little orphan of whom I have often told you. He lives with Don Fernando." The little woman threw up her hands and exclaimed, "Ay, pobrecito!" She held the boy close to her for a second, so close that Chico could smell the black cloth of her dress. The boys and girls lined up, and Chico could see that they were like steps. The highest step was the oldest girl, then came another girl, the 2 boys, and then the smallest girl of all. While he was still noticing this, he heard Don Ernesto's kind voice. the only familiar sound in this strange place, saying, "Chico, these are my sister Maria's children. They are Juana, Olivia, Pedro, Olmedo, and this is little Mariana." As he spoke, he pointed to each child. The girls curtsied and giggled, and the boys bowed stiffly. When he came to little Mariana, she rushed forward, her tiny pigtails swinging, and threw her arms about the boy and kissed him. Chico blushed. It was the first time in all his life that anyone had kissed him. All the children gathered around him now. They all talked at once in high, excited voices. "What is it like in the mountains?" one asked. "Are there any wild animals?" another asked. "Is it true that a great giant lives high in the Andes?" Still another wanted to know. Now, Chico thought his head would come off as a result of turning it back and forth to look from one to the other. His mouth opened, but he had no chance to answer. The questions were coming too fast. Tia Maria at last said sharply, "That is enough now. Leave the poor lad alone. You, Pedro, must get some wood. Juana, you and Olivia go to the kitchen. Rapido. If we are to have any dinner tonight, we must get to work." Chico stood still in the center of the courtyard as the children ran off in all directions. His ears rang with the strange sounds. "Well, don't you want dinner, Chico?" Don Ernesto asked, smiling. "I promise you it will be good. Tia Maria is a famous cook." Chico glanced down at his dirty, torn trousers and muddy hands. He was thinking that he could not eat with these people in their fine clothes. Don Ernesto understood. "It is all right, Chico," Don Ernesto said. "Tia Maria understands. See, I too have torn clothes. When you sell your hat, though, you can buy some new clothes and perhaps even get a haircut." He reached out a big hand and rumpled Chico's shaggy hair. Chico smiled. Almost happily, he followed Don Ernesto along the passageway that led to the kitchen. He had realized suddenly that he was hungry. Outside the kitchen door, there was a wooden bench with a tin basin on it. Don Ernesto dipped cold water from a jug and poured it over Chico's hands. Then Chico rubbed them with soap. In a few minutes, he had most of the mountain mud off his face and hands. When he had wet his hair and combed it, he looked quite a different boy than the one who had arrived. When Chico was through, he found that Don Ernesto had disappeared into one of the rooms. A little lost, Chico started back toward the patio. He did not know where to go, except there. He had to pass the kitchen door first, and from the kitchen streamed cooking odors like steam from a kettle. Never before had Chico smelled such odors. He stood there, sniffing hungrily. Inside the kitchen, all was a bustle. Tia Maria directed her oldest daughter, Juana, and spoke sharply to Olivia when she got in her way. And all the while, she worked busily at the well-scrubbed wooden center table. Chico slipped inside the door and looked around. What a wonderful place! Imagine having a whole room just for cooking. The kitchen was almost as large as Grandfather's whole house. The walls were painted white, and the shadows made by the candle climbed up them to the ceiling. In one corner stood a large square stove with 4 holes in it. Over the 4 holes hung wire hooks, and from each hook hung a black iron pot. It was from these that the good smells came. Tia Maria half turned, her full skirts swinging, and asked, "Is that you, Pedro?" "Then fan the fire, por favor?" Chico wanted to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. "Oh, it is you, little one," she said, smiling. "Well, you may help too. Here." She handed him a fan, made of broad strips of straw. "Sit here on the stool and fan the charcoal." Chico certainly knew how to make a fire burn. He sat timidly on the edge of the 3-legged stool and fanned. His arm moved back and forth furiously. As the charcoal began to burn noisily, Tia Maria said, "Chico, not so hard. Do not burn the house down." She spoke so kindly in her soft, whispering voice that Chico was not frightened, and even smiled timidly up at her. Chico fanned more gently, and the coals hummed softly. While he worked, he watched Tia Maria working at the wooden table. His mouth watered when he saw her mix mashed potatoes with soft yellow cheese, salt, pepper, and chopped green onions. Tia Maria felt his eyes on her and said, "These are lapingachos, Chico. Have you ever eaten any?" Chico shook his head shyly. Then he spoke up quite boldly. "No, Senora." "Well, you will tonight, and you will help cook them too," she answered. Turning toward the white stove with a flat potato cake in her hand, she dropped the cake into a pan of hot grease. Little bubbles rose around the edge, and the cheese sizzled. The wonderful smell made Chico's mouth water. Tia Maria handed the boy a flat wooden paddle and showed him how to slip it under the potato patty and flip it over. Carefully, he did just as she told him while she dropped more lapingachos into the pan. When the potato cakes were all cooking, Tia Maria took out a small iron pot and began to mix a sauce. To frying onions, she added tomatoes, rich milk, and creamy peanut butter. This bubbled gently on the back of the stove while she removed a large piece of pork that had been cooking in the largest iron pot. Everything at last seemed to be ready. Don Ernesto and Pedro and Olmedo and Juana were all there. Only Mariana was missing. Juana and Olivia helped their mother carry the steaming dishes into the little room where a long table was laid with spoons and dishes. First, there was a fish soup with bits of parsley floating on the top and potatoes swimming in its depths. Next came roasted pork, fat and crisp, with the peanut and tomato sauce on the top. Chico carried in the potato patties. There were even fried eggs and boiled rice. But still, Mariana had not come. Chico was so hungry now that he could have eaten a roast llama. Doña Maria called once more and then said, "Do not wait. Go on. When that naughty Mariana returns, she may eat in the kitchen." As they sat down at the table, Tia Maria called again, "Mariana, Mariana, venga, come at once." Then he heard no more, for seated with the others, he had already begun to eat his fish soup. All his attention was given to his food. Chapter 12. In the Night. Chico moved restlessly on the straw-filled mattress. His stomach was acting strangely. Perhaps, as Don Ernesto had said, he had eaten too much of the rich pork. But how good it had tasted! Even now, he licked his dry lips with the tip of his tongue. It was the middle of the night. A candle gleamed fitfully from behind the cloth screen that divided the large, square, white-walled sleeping room. The sharp bark of a dog sounded from the street. Somewhere in the distance, a cock crowed. Chico lay for a moment with eyes half open. What was Old Man doing now? Perhaps he too could not sleep, and lay propped up on one elbow, smoking his pipe and watching the flickering fire. A lump came into the boy's throat as he thought of grandfather. It seemed such a long time since he had been in the little stone hut on the Paramos. Now, in the quiet of the cold night, he felt lonely and strange. He wished that he had not come to this city. He wished that he had stayed on the Paramos with grandfather. Chico heard the soft voice of Tia Maria from the other side of the screen. Turning toward it, he could see the shadow of her small figure and her head, with its long pigtail, nodding up and down as she asked, "Pobrecito, pobrecito, what will become of the poor little one?" "That I do not know, hermana," the deep voice of Don Ernesto answered. "But the boy would come. He would have eaten his heart out there in the mountains. All his life he would have longed to know who he was. The only thing to do was to let him come to Quanka to search. And the old one? Was he not heartbroken to see the boy go? Ah, yes, but what could he do? But, Ernesto, how will the boy find his family? It is like searching for a needle lost in the ichu grass. What will happen if he fails? That is what worries me, Maria. There is only one clue, but I have said nothing of it to the boy. You have not yet seen the hat he wove. It is a fine one. It is the kind made by only a few families in Cuenca or Biblian. Now, this may seem unbelievable, but I think that Chico is the son of some member of one of those families. You may argue, he went on, stubbornly, but I believe that to weave fine hats, one must be born into a family which has woven them for many years. It is not something just to be learned from the old man. Chico has the knack, and he must come by it from his family. What will you do then? I intend to ask quietly about the town. Perhaps I shall even go to a Zogues and Biblian and Kanyar. Surely among those families who weave, someone will remember if a little boy and his parents once lived there. And if you find his family, then Chico will go to them, of course, and go to school, just as I wanted him to. Chico turned on the straw mattress. He did not want to live with strange people. Even if they were his family, he decided. He wanted to stay with grandfather forever. The dry straw rustled. He saw Don Ernesto hold a finger to his lips. "Chico," Don Ernesto called softly. "Si, Don Ernesto? Are you awake?" "Si, senor, I ate too much, I think." "Well, you must go to sleep." "Si, Don Ernesto, but—" Don Ernesto broke in. "No, go to sleep now. See, we are all going to bed. We must be up early tomorrow."